without further ado, we'll get into my presentation here. So my title is Rediscovering Science. I'm not completely sold on that title yet. I wanted to come up with a clever acronym, something like STORM, like Scientific Technique of Refined Meddling, something like that. But there was a deadline for these, so I had to kind of submit it. So I'm rolling with it for now. And then my faculty mentor is Dr. Millspaw, the physics department. So first thing I want to do, this is exactly what Susie said, but this is kind of my thesis statement. This is where I'm headed. I want to give underprivileged junior high students a chance to explore STEM fields in a way they never have before, to discover. And so this is where I'm headed. It wouldn't make sense to talk about my motivation and everything if you didn't know my end goal. So that's just up there for you to think about and kind of understand where I'm going. So first of all, my motivation. Why this particular project, right? So when I was brainstorming ideas for a project, I got to thinking about how I got to where I am today. Like, I'm standing here before you, a Chapman Scholar, studying physics, and like all this stuff. And I asked myself the question, what contributed to that? How did I get here? And there's many, many factors, but ultimately I have to break it down to stuff that I experienced when I was younger. So it was stuff growing up, like going to children's museums. It was having my parents encourage my curiosity. Science-based toys, Legos, Kinects, like that kind of stuff. Having the means to buy equipment. My parents buying me PVC pipe to build random stuff in the backyard. Getting exposure to well-educated people, and then having a do-it-yourself father. So all of these things together contributed to my interest in science and technology. So the question I then asked myself is, what happens if you take all of that away, right? Am I still going to be here interested in science and technology? And I think the simple answer to that is probably not, or at least the odds are a lot smaller, right? So what I wanted to do was identify a demographic that's the case for, right? They didn't have this privilege that I had. After doing, it didn't take much research, but after doing a small amount of research, I came to the conclusion I want to get into Title I schools. And if you don't know, this is largely common knowledge, but Title I is just a federal program that just helps underprivileged kids, and it aims to give them some sort of proficiency in school. So if you have non-underprivileged schools and then underprivileged schools, it's to close that gap. That's what it's there for. So ultimately, they serve the most underprivileged kids. This is the demographic I want to reach. I want to give them the opportunities, to an extent, that I had. So typically, students at these schools have
poor performance on tests, low graduation rates for high schools, low attendance rates for other schools. None of this comes as a surprise, right? Lots of free and discounted lunches, and then high levels of misbehavior and discipline. So I'm just hammering home the idea that these kids come from largely poor home lives. I don't want to talk too much about the reasoning behind that or anything, but that's just kind of a sad fact of the matter. Is that's the kind of kids that these schools are servicing. So from there, what do I want to do about it, right? Like, I have this goal, I have this demographic. What do I want to do about it? So this is the nitty-gritty, so to speak, of my project. So I have this specific demographic, Title I junior high. And so you may ask, why junior high? I chose junior high because that's where we lose a lot of kids in math and science and technology, largely because of the X, Y's, and Z's of algebra. Kids never make it past algebra, and then they never continue on. So I want to reach them before that, so 7th grade, and then a lot of 8th graders too. So this was the first question I answered. What Title I school do I want to go to? And I decided on Paul Harding Junior High. This is here in Fort Wayne. It's up by Wayne Trace. The principal there, Danielle Newman, was actually my 6th grade teacher. She was a science teacher even. And she's a huge fan of mine. Invited her to my graduation party from high school and stuff. Awesome, awesome lady. And so this is where I want to go, ultimately. I've been there. I went in there. I met with Mrs. Newman. I met with Joe Venderly, their guidance counselor. I met with their science teachers. So I've been there. I've done the work. I've done the research for this school. So specifically, Paul Harding. Let me just give you some statistics to really kind of give you an idea of what these students are like. So this is the state average for free or reduced lunches across the state of Indiana. So you can see over half of kids have no financial help for their lunches. So come from a decent background financially. That's that orange block there. So this is Paul Harding. 93% of the kids are on free or discounted lunches at Paul Harding. So this is a massive amount of, kind of poor kids. That's the bottom line. So that's just kind of their home life, gives you an idea. But let's talk about specifically test scores now. So this is the ECA for algebra at Paul Harding. They're in that green bar there, and then the state average and then the district average is up there as well. You can see that consistently below all of them. And if you're curious about that big drop, we can talk about that in the questions. I do have an explanation for that. But that's the ECA in algebra, so clearly well below the standards of the state and the district. And then the I-STEP's even worse. So obviously, I wish I had science data. I'm a physics guy. I wish they took I-STEP in physics or something, but math for now is the best estimation I have of where they are in STEM fields. So going back to this previous idea, I have this demographic, this place I want to go, and then I have this service I want to provide. So you can read that. I just want to supplement their STEM programs and kind of teach kids science in a way they've never seen before. You have to keep in mind, up until you get to high school, science is what? Science is like memorizing the planets in our solar system, like the layers of the Earth, the parts of the cell. Like that's science to them. It's a bunch of stuff you memorize. Occasionally they do labs, but that's a very poor representation of what science is. Like I like science where I get my hands dirty, right? And I want to convey that to them. So talking with Mrs. Newman and Joe Venderly at that Paul Harding came up with what we're going to do is we're going to put on an after-school program. So you may ask, what the heck is an after-school program going to do to help alleviate, a childhood where deprived of these kinds of things? And I'm going to talk more about that later, but what's kind of cool about Paul Harding is they have a very strong after-school presence already. The superintendent of East Allen came to them and asked them to put on many more after-school programs because the kids' home lives are so bad they don't want them going home. So they provide bus services to kids who participate in after-school programs, which helps me. And then they're heavily involved. They recruit kids for this. They can get a large number of kids involved. So I have this. Obviously, the question then is, how do I get from there to there, right? It's filling in all of the details, which is going to be the remainder of my presentation. So I threw my project timeline up there just to show you that I actually have a plan. I'm not just running around, throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, but I do have a plan of where I want to go and where I want to be. Applying for grants is the only thing I really want to highlight up there. I met with Heidi Sinquist this week to talk about it, and she was so excited because she's like, you definitely have a fundable project. I can get funding for this project to buy supplies and stuff, and we'll talk more about that later, more in the questions if needed. So that's my timeline, but I want to get into my project design, and I apologize for how this is set up, but it's kind of going to be like a big progression. Like I'm going to start with a big overall view and try and break it down piece by piece. So I have this after-school program, right? And so talking with Danielle Newman and all of them, we're going to meet once a week, probably on Wednesdays was the day we discussed. And then we're going to have 4 or 5 total meetings. So it's going to last for a month. This may happen more than one time. I want to emphasize that. Like I may do this multiple months throughout the year. One time, say, with 7th graders, one time with 8th graders. It's entirely up to the school. I want it to be their project as much as mine. And then it's going to be an hour and a half to 2 hour duration. So I'm going to have between 8 and 10 hours total to meet my goal of motivating these kids to be interested in science and technology, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do in just that small amount of time. The last 2 things are going to seem a little bit unrelated, but I think are really important. One thing I want to do is provide food to these kids. You remember that statistic about the lunches? A lot of these kids may go home and not get another meal in the day besides what they had at school, which is really sad. So if I can provide that, with funding that I get, that would be awesome. Heck, if they learn nothing about science, if they're not interested, but I can provide that one small service to them, that's awesome. And then I want to give out T-shirts, just as something that they can keep, something that they can have to remind them of what they did and how they participated in it, that kind of thing. So
what we're going to have is say 4 or 5 sessions throughout this month, right? And so each of these sessions I want to be dominated by one specific topic. So after talking with their science teachers and kind of understanding their curriculum, these are the 4 topics I came up with. Waves, programming robotics, electricity and magnetism, forces and pressure. All of this stuff they see in school to some extent, obviously not in depth, they're in junior high, but they see this stuff. They talk about it in class or after school programs. They see it. So within each of these sessions and topics, I want to break it down even further. So let's say we're talking about electricity and magnetism one day. What we're going to have is several stations set up. And so I have, just as an example, like station 1 could be a Van de Graaff generator, which if you don't know what it is, looks like this. It's essentially a way for kids to explore charge and electricity. So it takes a bunch of charge, stores it at that big metal ball on top, and you can shock yourself or shock others harmlessly. And there's actually tons of like little experiments you can do with it, and it's tons of fun. I still love playing with it, and I'm a junior studying physics. So lots of fun. And so the idea is I'm going to have 5 or 6 volunteers come with me to the school, and there's going to be someone manning this station, and they're going to have a group of 5 or 6 kids and be like, okay, this is a Van de Graaff generator. This is how it works. This is something you can do with it. And then we're going to have a bunch of other experiments that they can do. And the idea is these kids will see a phenomenon, that they can't explain, and then hopefully apply it to other situations. And that's kind of my sneaky way of getting these kids to think scientifically. Like, I have this interesting thing, what if I did this with this interesting thing, and that sort of thing. And so I have a huge spreadsheet of possible demonstrations. Obviously, they all go into those individual categories. We have gravity cloth we could do, or Chladni plate. I'm not going to go into the details of these, but we have tons of demonstrations in the physics department that I can do. So then the idea is, they go from station to station and get this broad overall topic. They get exposure to several different things within that. So one specific thing I do want to talk about, and something that I'm kind of proud of, is the programming and robotics method that I want to teach. So something unique about Paul Harding is they actually have a very good Lego robotics team. It's actually competes in state, which is kind of surprising, but they have it, and it's awesome. It's super cool. So what I wanted to do is then supplement that. They already have exposure to this. They're already pretty good at it, but how can I enhance that further? And so teaching programming, especially to kids who have never seen programming before, is hard, because you throw something like that up there, and unless you're Scott, who's a coding whiz, that means gibberish. That's gibberish to you, right? So one thing you can do, or one thing I want to do, is use these. And if you don't know what this is a Sphero. It's a programmable toy you can buy at virtually any store, and the price range varies from 40 to 100 bucks. And obviously I have my own, and what they have done is they have made ways that you can program these with very, very user-friendly interfaces. And I have it up there just to kind of show the comparison. It's a flowchart. Anyone can understand this, anyone can learn it in just a few minutes of playing around. And so what I want to do is get these kids the general idea of what a for loop is, how to do these basics of programming without actually having to learn a programming language, because that's really, really hard. So that would be an entire topic, is doing stuff with these, having them go through mazes, control the lights to take long exposure photographs and paint with one of these, stuff like that. I've tons of ideas. I can't get into all of the details right away, though. So then after the project's complete, ultimately I have to determine my success, right? That's the whole point of these projects. And so this is, I would say, probably the weakest part of my project, is how I'm going to determine success. And I would love to hear suggestions and people's ideas, because in the past we've had people do surveys. So ask them about their interest in stuff before and after, that kind of thing. If you go into a school, a lot of times scholars have gotten letters from the participants saying, oh, I really enjoyed this, et cetera, and then they're able to quantify it in that way. Personal interaction, that we have people in there talking with these kids, seeing how they react. So then you can talk with them in that way. But ultimately, what I would love to do is check with them after a time. Because what I want to do is generate interest for these kids when they go off to their high schools And they're in East Allen, so they're going to schools like Leo, New Haven, Woodland that have Project Lead the Way courses. I want them to enroll in those Project Lead the Way courses, you know, AP Biology, like do all of this stuff. But unfortunately, a year from now, I'll be presenting my finished project, and they'll be freshmen in high school at the latest, so that just simply isn't viable. So Irvi actually gave me the idea, you know, put an emphasis on personal interaction, because I'm going to have this team that I'm going to take in and interview them before and after each meeting and kind of see what they experienced, what they saw with these kids, what they saw change, and that kind of thing, and quantify it in that way. But that's where I'm at for now. That's kind of the gist of my project. I know I talked really fast. I apologize for that. If you have questions, comments, I'd love to hear them. Thank you for listening.
Great job. It's a very interesting project. I have one question with regard to the programming that you have planned. Do you anticipate including anything about career counseling? If you've got these students that are interested in these particular projects, were you planning on incorporating, you know, these are the kinds of careers you can have that, you know, address these kinds of projects on a daily basis or anything like that?
Right, absolutely. So when I went in and spoke with Harding, we were tossing out several different ideas of what I could do. And so one of the things that I might do alongside this is go in for their career day and just have, because if you're not familiar, a lot of junior highs in the area have these career days where they have someone from a particular field or job come in and talk about what they do. So then the idea would be is I have my own classroom during one of these career days where I talk exclusively about how you can get into science, technology, engineering, all of that. So that may be an aside to my project, and they really, really want me involved beyond this. So I may even go into the classrooms themselves and put on labs for the kids and stuff. But this is going to be the bulk of my project. So to your question, yes.
I've seen a few other projects where the scholars are trying to teach somebody or engage them in an idea or a topic or something. Do you foresee yourself leaving documentation so that this can be repeated or used elsewhere the same way some of those other projects have?
Absolutely. So obviously I want this to be repeatable. Ideally, I would have this be able to be repeatable by the school itself without external help. So if I get the proper funding, I have all of the materials available, and the school can put it on by themselves without me. So yes, keeping the documentation, keeping detailed notes on every single, you know, down to each demonstration, like the different ways you can pursue it, all of that. And I wish I could show you my spreadsheets that I'm working on, but yeah, I've been working on that, and yes, that's a great question and a great point. I want this to be repeatable and, you know, be able to be, you know, done by the school.
So I can't overemphasize how important a project like this is. So I knew after I took my first chemistry course in 10th grade what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And chemistry was what I wanted to do. I learned that because someone took the time to show me something that all of a sudden caught my interest. And so the portfolio of things that you're talking about showing individuals at a very young age is going to spark in somebody's mind something that says, I want to do that. Yeah. I remember my 10th grade teacher in class telling the class about principles of benzene rings and how electrons run around benzene rings, you know, freely. And gee, what if we took these benzene rings and we hooked them together and put them in a big chain? Couldn't we make an electrical conductor? 23 years later, as a research scientist at Allied Chemical Company, I put together benzene rings, and we made electrically conductive polymers, organic materials that conduct electrons like metals, from that experience at a very, very young age. What you're doing is fantastic.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. So if I may actually address that, it's talking about the personal interaction, you know, going into to see these kids and that kind of thing. And the issue a lot of Title I schools have is a lot of people want to throw money at it. Not a lot of people want to go in and work with them. And so that's what I think makes my project unique, and that's really what I want to do. That's my overall goal.
Have you talked with David Maloney at all about your follow-up?
No, I haven't.
I would encourage you greatly.
Okay.
He would be a very good person to actually give you suggestions.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm gonna. I forget things if I don't write them down, so. Go ahead, I'm
Okay,
listening.
I wasn't
Sorry.
sure. Okay, so I think your project is fantastic. However, I just have one question.
Mhm.
Like, I noticed that like your focus is on STEM fields, which is amazing. But I'm just wondering, middle school is like the year of development, and when, for example, when like female students decide not to go on, like because I'm just wondering if you're gonna maybe focus like at least an aspect on encouraging young women to go on into STEM fields, because there is a big gap, and if you're hoping to address that.
Yeah, I would love to focus on that if I could. And so, you know, I'm gonna make a point of having the volunteers from the physics department, you know, making that a diverse group. That's important to me, so that, you know, these young girls can see, you know, women studying physics, which you don't always see a whole lot, so that they get exposure to that. And actually, this will tie in nicely to the next presentation, because I think what you're talking about is very similar to Maddie's project. So thank you.
I like this project. I think it's really cool.
Thank you.
I'm excited to see what comes of it. I'm curious if there's any way to take this and send this home with the students, or like what parameters surround your funding that you'll get. Like if you could send them home with like Lego kits or Connect kits or things
Or
like that.
one of these.
Or one of those.
Yeah, that's the
I think
idea.
that'd be really cool.
So the grants I'm applying for, I could get funding anywhere between $1,000 to $10,000. If I get $10,000, I'm going to be buying a set of these and sending them home with the kids, so that they have exposure to programming, and then have something that they can program themselves. Or if I don't get the funding, if you remember, there was actually a Chapman project not too long ago where he 3D printed robots and taught kids to program and stuff like that. So I'd also like to give them access to those kinds of resources. So if they want to pursue that later, they can. But thank you. All right, thank you.